Unji had spent the better part of the afternoon convincing herself that the dress was fine. It was not a small effort. The dress was a deep burgundy with a neckline that her mother had called sophisticated and her older sister Hayan had called trying too hard, and it had been purchased 3 weeks ago with the specific intention of being exactly right for this evening, for the rooftop in Gangnam, with the careful lighting and the 80 guests and the floral arrangements that had been selected by Han Ji-soo's mother, with the kind of attention that communicated, in every choice of bloom and height and color, that the event belonged to the family receiving her rather than to the two people whose engagement it was meant to celebrate. She had stood in front of the mirror in the dressing room of the boutique and thought, this is the right dress. She had believed it then. She had needed to believe it again approximately 11 times between the moment she put it on this evening and the moment she stepped out of the car in front of the building, and each time she had succeeded, which she counted as a minor victory of will over the specific category of doubt that had accompanied her to every significant event of her adult life. The doubt that said, you are almost right, but not quite. You are adjacent to what is required, but not the thing itself. You are close, but close is its own kind of distance. She was good at overcoming that doubt. She had been overcoming it for 29 years. It had made her, she thought, reasonably competent at most things and genuinely excellent at none of them, which was a configuration that had its uses in certain kinds of lives and its significant costs in others. The rooftop was everything she had expected, which was to say, it was beautiful in the way of things that had been paid for and arranged and considered from multiple angles and found at each angle to be correct. The city spread below and around it in the particular way that Gangnam spread at night, not with the warm density of neighborhoods that had grown naturally, but with the cool precision of an area that had been designed to communicate a specific kind of success, all glass and light, and the deliberate verticality of buildings that understood their own significance. String lights had been strung between the planters at the rooftop's edge. Small tables held arrangements of white and cream flowers that probably had names she did not know. A bar had been set up near the east wall with the casual elegance of a bar that was not supposed to look like it had required effort, which was the specific aesthetic of every element of this evening, the performance of effortlessness, the studied naturalness of people who had spent considerable resources making things look as if they had required none. Han Ji-soo's mother, Madame Han, found her within 2 minutes of her arrival. This was not an accident. Madame Han operated with the precision of someone who understood that an event was managed from the first moment of its execution, that the variables which were allowed to move freely in the first 10 minutes were variables that could not be controlled in the last 10, and Unji had been identified, somewhere in the planning process, as a variable that benefited from early positioning. She was warm in the way that women who have perfected warmth as a management tool are warm, which was to say completely and with a quality that would have been indistinguishable from genuine affection if you did not know what you were looking at. Unji knew what she was looking at. She had learned over the 14 months of her engagement to Ji-soo that Madame Han's warmth was a form of instruction, that it communicated through its presence what was expected and through its absence what had gone wrong. The warmth tonight was at its standard operational temperature. This meant nothing had gone wrong yet. She was placed at the correct table, she was introduced to the correct people, she performed the correct version of herself, the one that was sophisticated but not intimidatingly so, interested but not aggressively intellectual, warm but not effusive, present but not demanding of attention. She had developed this version over 14 months of practice, and she ran it now with the efficiency of something habituated, the way you run familiar software without thinking about the underlying code, just the interface, just the output, just the performance of a woman who had, finally, after years of approximate calibration, located the correct setting for this particular room. She had not located the correct setting for any room. She had located the setting that caused the least friction. These were, she knew, not the same thing, but she had been confusing them for long enough that the distinction had become theoretical rather than practical, a thing she understood abstractly without being able to feel the difference in her body. She was 3 glasses of water and 1 glass of wine into the evening when she noticed the man at the corner table. He was alone, which was unusual in a room organized around pairs and clusters, around the social architecture of people who had been assembled specifically to form connections that would be useful to someone. He was in a dark suit at a table near the rooftop's edge with a glass of something that he was not drinking, and he was looking at nothing in particular. Or rather, he was looking at the general space of the rooftop with the quality of someone whose attention had not yet found something worth allocating itself fully to. He was not attending the event in the way the other guests were attending. He was present in the space the way a weather system is present, not performing participation, not managing impressions, not doing the social calculus that everyone else on the rooftop was running simultaneously with their conversations. He was simply there, with a quality of stillness that was not boredom and was not contentment, but was something that existed prior to both, some fundamental baseline of a man who required nothing from his immediate environment, and was therefore not performing the requirement. She looked at him for longer than she looked at most things. She was not sure why. She filed it under irrelevant and returned to the conversation she had been half present in, which was about the Han family's upcoming development project in Mapo, which she was processing with approximately 40% of her attention because the other 60% had gone somewhere it had not been sent. At 9:15, Han Ji-soo's best man tapped a glass, and the room organized itself toward the small raised platform near the bar where a microphone had been set up. And Ji-soo took the platform with the ease of a man who had been the center of rooms his entire life and never had an occasion to doubt that this was the correct position for him. He was handsome in the specific way of men who had grown up being told they were, with the kind of confidence that required no interrogation because it had never been denied. He smiled at Eunji from the platform, and she smiled back, and the smile she returned was genuine in the way that things are genuine when they are also partly performance, when the genuine and the performed have been layered together for long enough that separating them has become more effort than the separation is worth. He began. He was good at beginnings. She knew this about him. He had the gift of the first sentence, the quality of opening that made a room lean in. And the room leaned in now, the 80 guests with their glasses and their correct attire and their managed expressions of anticipation, leaning toward the platform where Han Ji-soo held the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had given many speeches and knew how they worked. He talked about the evening, about how it represented something significant, about the journey of the past 14 months, about what it meant to stand in this place, in front of the people who mattered most, and to speak the truth of what he felt. She heard the word truth, something small and alert activated in her chest. She had learned, over 14 months, that when Jisoo used the word truth as a frame for what was coming, the thing that was coming was something he had decided to say regardless of its effect, because he had classified it as honesty, and honesty, in his framework, absolved the speaker of responsibility for the landing. Truth was the container he put things in when he wanted to deliver them without accountability. She was still smiling. She kept smiling. The smile was doing something independent of the rest of her now, operating on its own mechanism, because the rest of her was becoming very still and very quiet, in the way of a person running a rapid internal assessment of a situation that has just changed its character. He said she was not quite what he had imagined when he imagined the woman he would bring into his family. He said it gently, with the warmth of a man who believed that gentleness was the same as kindness, which it was not. He said he had imagined someone more at ease in certain rooms, someone whose conversation moved more naturally at the level his career required, someone whose ambitions aligned more directly with the trajectory he was building. He said he had convinced himself that these were small things, that love covered gaps of this nature, that what he felt for her was sufficient to bridge the distance between what she was and what he had needed. He said he was beginning to understand that he had been optimistic about the bridging. He said these things with the microphone in his hand and 80 people listening, with the string lights and the white and cream flowers and the city below the glass railing, with his mother in the front row and Eunji's mother 2 tables back, and Hyun beside her with the particular expression of someone watching a natural disaster from a window, the expression of a person who has identified that something terrible is happening and has determined that the glass between themselves and it is sufficient protection, provided they do not move. He said these things as a list, measured and organized, each point following from the previous, with the logic of a man who had thought about this enough to sequence it correctly. He said them as though the saying of them was a kindness, as though Unji, standing at the table 3 meters from the platform in the burgundy dress she had spent the afternoon convincing herself was fine, was the beneficiary of something rather than the subject of it. She did not move. She had learned the stillness in the specific school of women who have been made into subjects in rooms that expected them to receive it gracefully, who have been told things about themselves in front of witnesses, and have understood, in the receiving of it, that movement was the dangerous response, that movement communicated what the room would then use as the defining image of the event. She was very still. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was doing the thing it did when the genuine and the performed had been fully suspended, and what remained was simply the neutral mask of a woman processing something she had not yet had time to decide what to do with. She was not going to cry. She had decided this somewhere in the third sentence, had made the decision with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that certain decisions needed to be made early and held regardless of subsequent developments. She was not going to cry in this dress, in front of these people, with his mother in the front row, and the string lights and the flowers that communicated whose event this actually was. She was not going to give this moment that. She was not going to give him that. She was going to stand here, and she was going to remain standing, and she was going to find on the other side of whatever this was, some version of herself that had not been present for the preceding 14 months. Some version that had a different answer to the questions she had stopped asking because it seemed like a luxury she could not afford. She was in the middle of this decision when she heard the chair, a single chair, near the edge of the rooftop, the controlled movement of someone rising, not with urgency, not with the quick reactive energy of a person responding to something, but with the deliberateness of someone who had made a decision and was implementing it at their own pace, which was a pace that did not consult the room's expectations. She knew, before she looked, with the certainty of something that bypassed the analytical and arrived directly in the body, that it was the man from the corner table, the one in the dark suit with the untouched glass and the quality of a weather system, the one she had filed under irrelevant and whose 60% allocation of her attention had not fully returned. She looked. He was standing. He was looking at Han Ji-soo on the platform with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion about something and is not in a hurry to announce it because announcements were never his preferred instrument anyway. His face was composed, which was the wrong word for it, but was the closest available. Composed implying effort, and this was not effort. This was simply what his face was when it was not being asked to be anything else, which was to say, it was the face of someone who had removed all the layers that faces add for the benefit of other people, and what remained was something that had no interest in performance. He was not angry. Anger was too specific, too personal, too available to the ordinary human range. What he had was something colder and more fundamental. The quality of someone who has identified a thing that is wrong and has decided, not emotionally but structurally, that it will stop. He moved. The rooftop accommodated him the way spaces accommodate people who do not ask for accommodation, but simply move through a space as though the space has already agreed to receive them. People stepped back without deciding to step back. Conversations ceased without the speakers choosing to cease them. The path between the corner table and the platform cleared with the natural efficiency of water finding the available channel, and he walked through it without acknowledging that it was happening, without the slight performance of someone who knows they are being watched and is managing the knowledge. He was being watched by 80 people, and he had made no arrangement with any of them about this. Han Ji-soo had stopped speaking. This was not a decision he had made. It was something that happened to him as the man approached. The way sound stops when a larger sound arrives, not through competition, but through the simple physics of volume and presence. He stopped. He held the microphone. He looked at the man approaching the platform with the expression of someone encountering a variable that had not been in his calculations, that did not have an assigned position in the sequence of his evening. The man reached the platform. He stopped beside it. He looked at Han Ji-soo with the directness of someone for whom directness was not a choice, but a condition, who had never learned the social skill of looking at things sideways, who had apparently decided that sideways was an inefficiency he had no interest in developing. He extended his hand. He waited. The waiting had a quality. It was the quality of something inevitable, of a conclusion that had already been reached and was simply allowing the formality of the process to complete itself. Han Ji-soo looked at the extended hand. He looked at the face above it. He looked at the room, at the 80 guests who were completely silent, at his mother in the front row whose expression had undergone a significant recalibration in the past 30 seconds, at the platform he was standing on, which had, in the space of one man crossing a rooftop, ceased to be the position of authority it had been when he stepped onto it. He placed the microphone in the extended hand. The man held it for a moment. He looked at it. Then he turned to the room, to the 80 guests and the string lights and the white and cream flowers and the city below the glass railing, and he spoke. His voice was low. It was the kind of low that did not require a microphone, but used it as a courtesy to the room, as the acknowledgement that the room existed and deserved to hear what was being said clearly rather than partially. It was the kind of voice that had never needed volume to be the dominant sound in a space, that achieved its effect through the quality of its certainty rather than through its decibels, and the room received it with the total silence of people who understand that they are in the presence of something that has decided to speak, and that what it decides to say will be the truth of the evening, regardless of everything that preceded it. He said, "I would like to make a different toast." He paused, not for effect, not the theatrical pause of someone who understood pacing as performance, the pause of someone allowing the sentence to be what it was before adding to it. He said, "To a woman who walked into a room that was not designed for her and conducted herself with more dignity than anyone in this room has managed tonight." He looked at Eunji. The look was direct and without ornamentation, the look of someone who saw things accurately and had no interest in seeing them any other way, and it landed on her with the specific weight of something that had been traveling toward her for the full length of the evening without her knowing its trajectory. He said, "That is not a small thing." He said it simply, as fact, as the plain statement of a plain truth. It is, in fact, the only thing worth raising a glass for tonight. He raised his glass. He had brought it from the corner table. It had been full when she first saw it, untouched, and it was still full, and he raised it with the single quality of a man making a gesture that he intended to mean exactly what it appeared to mean, nothing more and nothing less. The room was silent for a moment that lasted longer than its clock duration. Then, Eunji's mother, 2 tables back, raised her glass. It was a small movement, an elderly woman lifting a glass of champagne in a room full of people who were deciding what to do, and the decision she made was the first decision. And first decisions in rooms like this one have a weight that subsequent decisions do not, because the first decision names the direction, and every decision after it either follows or explicitly refuses to follow. And most people in rooms like this one do not explicitly refuse. They followed. Not everyone, not with uniformity, but enough, and with sufficient conviction, that the room reorganized itself around the thing that names the truth of what has been witnessed. Han Ji-soo had stepped back from the platform. Eunji did not look at him. She was looking at the man who had crossed the rooftop for her, who was now standing at the edge of the platform with the glass still raised, looking at her with the same quality of attention, and she thought about what it meant, the specific thing that had just happened, the specific sequence of a man identifying something wrong and deciding, without consultation and without the construction of justification, that it would stop. She thought about the 14 months and the correct settings and the correct versions of herself and the accumulated cost of performing adjacency to what was required rather than simply being what she was. And she thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her, had really looked, with the attention of someone who was not assessing her for a purpose, but was simply seeing her, the actual her, the one underneath the settings. She picked up her glass. She looked at him across the room. She raised it. Before we go any further, if this story is moving something in you right now, take 2 seconds and like this video. It tells me you want more of this, and I will keep making it. Leave me a comment and tell me what you felt in this moment. I read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now because the next story is already on its way. She found him at the edge of the rooftop near the glass railing, a few minutes after the toast, when the room had resumed the performance of being a party with the particular forced energy of 80 people deciding collectively that the way forward was to behave as though the preceding 20 minutes had been a brief interruption rather than the defining event of the evening. He was standing with the city below him in his glass, still mostly full, held at his side, and he was looking at the city with the quality of someone who had said what he came to say and was now simply existing in the aftermath of it, which was, she was coming to understand, simply how he existed in all conditions, with that quality of self-containment that required nothing from the environment around it. She stopped beside him. She looked at the city, too, for a moment, because looking at the city was easier than leading with the things she needed to say, and she was someone who had always preferred to locate the correct approach before making it, rather than arriving at the approach through the conversation. Then she said, "I need to know who you are." He looked at her. He said, "Ryu Seok-jin." She said, "I know the name. I mean, I need to know why you did that." He was quiet for a moment. The city moved below them with its indifferent energy, taxis and lit windows and the distant sound of traffic that did not know or care what had happened on the rooftop above it. Then he said, "Because what he was doing needed to stop." She said, "That is not a reason. That is a description of the effect." Something shifted in his expression. It was not surprise exactly, but was the response of someone encountering something they had not specifically anticipated, the slight recalibration of a person whose expectation has been met with something more precise than they were prepared for. He said, "You are right." He said it without resistance, with the same quality he seemed to apply to everything, the quality of a man who did not require the world to be wrong in order for himself to be right. He said, "The reason is that I have been in rooms my entire life where someone with a microphone decided that another person was the subject, and the room accepted it. And I have sat in those rooms and accepted it too, because the calculation was that it was not my place." He paused. Tonight, the calculation was different. She said, "Why tonight?" He looked at her. He said, "Because you were not going to break. I could see that from the corner table. You were not going to break, and you were not going to look down, and you were not going to give him the image of you breaking as the thing the room carried home. And watching someone hold themselves together under that kind of weight, with that kind of precision," he paused again, "is not something I could sit still for." She looked at the city. She thought about what he had described, about being seen from the corner table, about the quality of attention he had apparently been directing at her from a position she had registered and filed under irrelevant. And she felt the strangeness of it, the specific strangeness of being known before the knowing, of being observed with a kind of attention that she had not been aware was available. She said, "You are the partner in the Mapo development project." He did not hesitate. He said, "Yes." She said, "The one that includes the lot where the Chamsuri Community Center is located?" He said, "Yes." She looked at him. She said, "I volunteer there. I have volunteered there for 3 years. 200 families use that center. The renovation plan for that area would displace the center and every program it runs." She said it the way she said things when she was being completely direct, without cushioning, without the management of the other person's comfort that she had been trained to perform, because this was the question that needed to be asked, and she was the person asking it, and she was not going to ask it at an angle. She said, "So I need to know if I am a variable in something I do not have the full information about. I need to know if your being here tonight and what you did has anything to do with that project and that location and what you may need from the people who work there." He looked at her for a long moment. The city continued to be the city below them, and the string lights continued to hold the rooftop in their warm circle, and the party continued behind them with its reconstructed energy. And he looked at her with the attention she was becoming familiar with, the complete and patient regard, and she held the look because she needed to, because the answer to this question was the hinge on which everything else turned, and she was not going to look away from it. He said, "The development plan was revised 8 months ago. The Chamsiri site is no longer included in the renovation footprint." He said it plainly. He said, "I made the decision to revise it because the community infrastructure on that site produces outcomes that have measurable value, and I was able to make the case numerically to the other partners, and they accepted the case." He paused. "That decision was made 8 months ago. You were not a variable in it because I did not know you existed 8 months ago." She said, "And now?" He said, "Now I know you exist." He said it with the same level voice and the same quality of the plain statement delivered without ornamentation. He said, "Those are two separate facts. The revision of the project was one thing, tonight was another. I am telling you both things are true, and neither one caused the other." She stood with that. She turned it in her mind the way she turned things that mattered, carefully and from multiple angles, looking for the inconsistency, the place where the structure revealed a different load-bearing arrangement than the one presented. She had spent 14 months not looking for inconsistencies, had spent 14 months performing the version of herself that was grateful enough not to ask the difficult question, and she was done with that, was through the other side of it, was standing on a rooftop in Gangnam having just watched her engagement dissolve in real time, and she was asking the difficult question because that was who she actually was when she was not performing the correct setting. She said, "Why did you come tonight?" He said, "I was invited as a courtesy, protocol, the kind of invitation that exists to be seen on the list rather than to be acted on." She said, "But you came." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He was quiet. This was a different kind of quiet from the others, not the quiet of a man locating the accurate statement, but the quiet of a man deciding how much of the accurate statement to offer. She waited. She had learned patience in the specific school of someone who understood that pushing a person toward a conclusion they had not reached independently produced a conclusion that did not hold its shape, and she wanted a conclusion that held its shape. He said, "I have been aware of the Chamsiri project for 3 years. Your name appears in the quarterly reports I receive as part of my partnership review." He said it looking at the city, not at her, which was the first time he had said something significant without the directness of his full attention, and she noted the difference. He said, "I know what the work there is. I know what it costs, the people who do it, and I know what it produces." He paused. "When I read that the engagement party for one of the Han family's sons involved a woman with your name, I found it notable." She said, "Notable?" He said, "Improbable is closer." He said it with the edge of something that in another man might have been the beginning of a smile. He said, "The woman who runs the Chamsiri volunteer program and the woman marrying into the Han development family occupied, in my understanding of the city, separate and non-intersecting categories." She said, "You checked?" He said, "I read the information that was available to me. Yes." She breathed. The night air was cool and the city was lit, and she was holding a glass she had forgotten about, and the evening had become, in the past 40 minutes, something that bore no resemblance to the evening she had dressed for, that she had spent the afternoon calibrating herself for, and she was in it differently than she was in the evening she had planned. She was in it as herself, as the actual her, the one who asked the difficult question and waited for the answer, and looked at the city from a rooftop while her engagement dissolved behind her, and felt, underneath all of it, the particular sensation of a pressure she had been living inside for a very long time, beginning, slowly, to release. She said, "The project revision, the Chamsiri site, you said you made the case numerically." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you could defend it." He said, "I have defended it, twice to partners who had reservations. The case holds." She said, "I want to see the numbers." He looked at her then, the full attention, the complete and patient regard. She met it. He said, "Yes." She said, "Not tonight." She said, "But yes." He said, "Yes." She set her glass on the railing. She looked at the city for a moment, at the particular arrangement of light and height that Gangnam offered at this hour, and she thought about 3 years of quarterly reports with her name in them, and a man at a corner table with an untouched glass, and a quality of attention that she had filed under irrelevant, and that had not been irrelevant at all, and she thought about what it meant to have been seen before the seeing was declared, to have been known in one register before being known in another. She said, "I do not know what to do with this evening." He said, "You do not need to do anything with it tonight." She said, "That is not advice I am accustomed to receiving." He said, "I know." He said it with the quality of someone who did know, who had read 3 years of quarterly reports and drawn accurate conclusions about the kind of life they documented. He said, "Most of the advice you have received has been about what to do next. I am not offering that." She said, "What are you offering?" He looked at her. He said, The information that the evening is over and tomorrow is a different situation, and that you are the kind of person who makes better decisions with adequate sleep and the full context rather than under the conditions that have existed for the past several hours. He paused. And the information that I would like to be part of the full context, if you are willing, when you are ready. He said, the development plan was revised 8 months ago. The Chamsiri site is no longer included in the renovation footprint. He said it plainly. He said, I made a decision to revise it because the community infrastructure on that site produces outcomes that have measurable value, and I was able to make the case numerically to the other partners, and they accepted the case. He paused. That decision was made 8 months ago. You were not a variable in it because I did not know you existed 8 months ago. She said, and now? He said, now I know you exist. He said it with the same level voice and the same quality of the plain statement delivered without ornamentation. He said, those are two separate facts. The revision of the project was one thing, tonight was another. I am telling you both things are true, and neither one caused the other. She stood with that. She turned it in her mind the way she turned things that mattered, carefully and from multiple angles, looking for the inconsistency, the place where the structure revealed a different load-bearing arrangement than the one presented. She had spent 14 months not looking for inconsistencies, had spent 14 months performing the version of herself that was grateful enough not to ask the difficult question, and she was done with that, was through the other side of it, was standing on a rooftop in Gangnam having just watched her engagement dissolve in real time, and she was asking the difficult question because that was who she actually was when she was not performing the correct setting. She said, "Why did you come tonight?" He said, "I was invited as a courtesy, protocol, the kind of invitation that exists to be seen on the list rather than to be acted on." She said, "But you came." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He was quiet. This was a different kind of quiet from the others, not the quiet of a man locating the accurate statement, but the quiet of a man deciding how much of the accurate statement to offer. She waited. She had learned patience in the specific school of someone who understood that pushing a person toward a conclusion they had not reached independently produced a conclusion that did not hold its shape, and she wanted a conclusion that held its shape. He said, "I have been aware of the Chamsiri project for 3 years. Your name appears in the quarterly reports I receive as part of my partnership review." He said it looking at the city, not at her, which was the first time he had said something significant without the directness of his full attention, and she noted the difference. He said, "I know what the work there is. I know what it costs, the people who do it, and I know what it produces." He paused. "When I read that the engagement party for one of the Han family's sons involved a woman with your name, I found it notable." She said, "Notable?" He said, "Improbable is closer." He said it with the edge of something that in another man might have been the beginning of a smile. He said, "The woman who runs the Chamsiri volunteer program and the woman marrying into the Han development family occupied, in my understanding of the city, separate and non-intersecting categories." She said, "You checked?" He said, "I read the information that was available to me. Yes." She breathed. The night air was cool and the city was lit, and she was holding a glass she had forgotten about, and the evening had become, in the past 40 minutes, something that bore no resemblance to the evening she had dressed for, that she had spent the afternoon calibrating herself for, and she was in it differently than she was in the evening she had planned. She was in it as herself, as the actual her, the one who asked the difficult question and waited for the answer, and looked at the city from a rooftop while her engagement dissolved behind her, and felt, underneath all of it, the particular sensation of a pressure she had been living inside for a very long time, beginning, slowly, to release. She said, "The project revision, the Chamsiri site, you said you made the case numerically." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you could defend it." He said, "I have defended it, twice to partners who had reservations. The case holds." She said, "I want to see the numbers." He looked at her then, the full attention, the complete and patient regard. She met it. He said, "Yes." She said, "Not tonight." She said, "But yes." He said, "Yes." She set her glass on the railing. She looked at the city for a moment, at the particular arrangement of light and height that Gangnam offered at this hour, and she thought about 3 years of quarterly reports with her name in them, and a man at a corner table with an untouched glass, and a quality of attention that she had filed under irrelevant, and that had not been irrelevant at all, and she thought about what it meant to have been seen before the seeing was declared, to have been known in one register before being known in another. She said, "I do not know what to do with this evening." He said, "You do not need to do anything with it tonight." She said, "That is not advice I am accustomed to receiving." He said, "I know." He said it with the quality of someone who did know, who had read 3 years of quarterly reports and drawn accurate conclusions about the kind of life they documented. He said, "Most of the advice you have received has been about what to do next. I am not offering that." She said, "What are you offering?" He looked at her. He said, "The information that the evening is over and tomorrow is a different situation, and that you are the kind of person who makes better decisions with adequate sleep and the full context, rather than under the conditions that have existed for the past several hours." He paused. "And the information that I would like to be part of the full context, if you are willing, when you are ready." She looked at him. She thought about 14 months of performing the correct setting and the specific relief of no longer being required to perform it, and the strangeness of standing beside a man who seemed to want the actual her, the one who asked the difficult question and waited for the answer, who read quarterly reports with her name in them and found it improbable that she was marrying into a development family, who had crossed a rooftop because what was happening needed to stop, and he was the one available to stop it. She said, "You are a very unusual person." He said, "I have been told." She said, "I mean that as a description, not a criticism." He said, "I know." She said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because you are precise with language. You would have said criticism if you meant criticism." She looked at him. She felt the almost smile that was trying to arrive on her face, and she let it come, because it was hers, and it was real, and she was not managing herself tonight, was not performing the correct setting, was not calibrating towards some external requirement. She let the smile come. She felt it on her face. She felt it as the actual thing, the expression that belonged to her specifically, the one she had been folding away for so long that its appearance had the quality of something returning from a long absence. He looked at the smile. Something changed in his expression that she thought she would spend a long time learning to read, something that moved through it and was gone before she could fully catalog it, but that left a different quality in what remained, something slightly warmer than the baseline, something that the baseline had apparently been capable of all along and had simply not had occasion to demonstrate. She said, "I need to go back in there." He said, "Yes." She said, "I need to speak to Jisoo and his mother and my sister." He said, "Yes." She said, "None of those conversations are going to be simple." He said, "No." She said, "And then I am going to go home and sleep for a long time." He said, "Yes." She said, "And in the morning, I am going to begin the process of understanding what this evening actually means for the practical dimensions of my life, which are numerous and not simple, and which I am going to need to address with the full of my attention." He said, "Yes." She looked at him. She said, "You agree with everything I say." He said, "I agree with accurate things." He said it simply, and she thought that this was probably the most efficient summary she had yet received of who he was, that he agreed with accurate things and did not agree with inaccurate ones, and had developed, over however many years it had taken, the capacity to distinguish between them with sufficient confidence to act on the distinction in front of 80 people on a rooftop. She said, "The second conversation." He said, "Yes." She said, "It should not happen at a gala." He said, "Agreed." She said, "Somewhere without microphones." The almost smile appeared again at the corner of his mouth, brief and deliberate, the expression of a man who found something genuinely worth finding and was acknowledging it with the minimum available gesture. He said, "I know a place." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the party, toward the conversations that needed to happen, toward the work of understanding what this evening had changed and what it had revealed, and what version of herself was going to be responsible for navigating the morning. She walked with her spine straight, and the burgundy dress that had taken the afternoon to convince herself was fine, and she felt walking that she had not needed to convince herself it was fine because it was simply fine. It was simply a dress she had chosen. It was simply the clothing of a woman who was going back into a room to handle what needed to be handled and who was going to do it without the performance of the correct setting, without the calibration toward the external requirement, without the management of her own presence for the comfort of people who had not managed their presence for hers. She looked fine. She looked like herself. These were, she was beginning to understand, the same thing. She handled the conversations. She handled them with the directness she had always had and had always muffled, and the directness was not cruel and was not unkind, but was simply clear, the quality of a woman who had arrived at the decision to say the accurate thing and was implementing it with the same unhurried certainty she had watched a man implement across a rooftop 2 hours earlier. Han Ji-soo was defensive, and then conciliatory, and then when the conciliation did not produce the response he was looking for, quietly and revealingly cold, which was the version of him she had always suspected existed underneath the handsome case it was housed in and had spent 14 months not looking at directly. His mother attempted management. Eun-ji declined to be managed with the specific politeness of someone who understood that the management was being offered in good faith and was also completely irrelevant to the actual situation. Hae-eun took her arm near the exit and said in a low voice that she had always thought this was wrong, that she had always known, and Eun-ji looked at her sister with something that was not quite the forgiveness that absolved and was not quite the resentment that sustained, but was something honest and accurate, something that said, "I know you did, and you did not say it, and we will talk about that when we have both had time to be in a better place for the conversation."
She took the elevator down. She stood in the lobby of the Gangnam building with the city outside the glass doors and her phone in her hand and the evening behind her. And she felt the specific sensation of having put down something heavy enough that the absence of its weight had not yet fully registered, that the body was still braced for it, still carrying the muscle memory of its presence, and would need some time before it understood that the thing was no longer there. She thought about the corner table and the untouched glass and the quality of a weather system, about a man who read quarterly reports and found her name improbable and had come anyway, and had stood up anyway, and had said what needed to be said anyway, and had then stood beside her at the railing with the city below them and agreed with accurate things and declined to agree with inaccurate ones, and offered the second conversation with the specific patience of someone who was not in a hurry, because he understood that the right pace was her pace and not his. She took the subway home. She sat in the car with the city moving past the windows in the particular way of a city seen from underground, in glimpses and flashes and the brief revelations of stations. And she thought about tomorrow and the practical dimensions and the work of understanding what the evening had changed. And she thought about 3 years of quarterly reports and a name that had been in them all along, and a man who had known, before tonight, that she was improbable in the most interesting sense of that word. She slept. In the morning she made coffee and she sat at her small table with the view of the street below, and she thought about the Chamsari Center and the 200 families and the numbers she had been promised and the conversation she was going to have when she was ready. And she was almost ready. She could feel herself almost there, the way you feel yourself almost at the top of something you have been climbing for a long time. She thought about what she had been climbing for a long time and what the top of it looked like, and whether the top was a destination or a perspective, whether what changed at the top was where you were or what you could see from there. She thought it was probably the perspective. She thought it was probably always the perspective. She finished the coffee. She opened her laptop. She had work to do.
the actual work, the work that had her name in quarterly reports and produced measurable outcomes and had been held, at its edges, by the decision of a man 8 months ago to make a numerical case to resistant partners, because the community infrastructure on a particular site produced outcomes that had value. The work that was hers regardless, the work that was hers first. She began. 6 months later, the Chamsery Center received its first significant institutional funding from a grant that Ryu Sok-jin had not provided but had connected her to through 3 introductions over 2 conversations, each one made without precondition and without the expectation of credit, in the specific way of someone who understood that facilitating a thing and owning a thing were different categories, and who had no interest in the second. She signed the grant agreement at the small table in her office, and then she sat with it for a moment, with the quality of someone allowing a significant thing to be significant before moving on to the next thing. She looked at the table. She thought about the numerical case and the 3 years and the quarterly reports and the man at the corner table who had read them, and she thought about what it meant to have been building something real for long enough that it became, eventually, visible to someone who knew how to look for real things. She called him. He picked up on the second ring, which was something she had learned about him. The second ring, never the first and never the third. The second ring as the consistent expression of someone who was available but not waiting, present but not anticipating, there in the way of something reliable and unhurried. She said, "The grant came through." He said, "I know. I received confirmation this morning." She said, "You did not tell me." He said, "It was yours to hear first." She held the phone. She felt the thing that she felt regularly now, the thing she had not had a word for at the beginning and had found words for slowly through the accumulation of mornings and second conversations and numerical cases, and a man who agreed with accurate things and had never, in 6 months, asked her to be the version of herself that any room required. The thing that was not gratitude exactly, though it contained gratitude, and was not love exactly, though it was becoming that, but it was something that lived underneath both of them, something more fundamental, the sensation of being met by someone at the actual dimension of yourself, not the adjusted version, not the calibrated version, not the version that was almost right but not quite, but the actual you, the one that had always been there and spent years being managed down to a more acceptable size. She said, "I want to show you the new program plans." He said, "Yes." She said, "Tonight." He said, "Yes." She said, "Bring the quarterly report." A pause. Then the almost smile, which she could hear in his voice now, had learned to hear it even through a telephone, the brief and deliberate acknowledgement of something genuinely worth finding. He said, "Yes." She ended the call. She looked at the grant agreement on her desk. She looked at the work that was hers, that had always been hers, that was real in the way that things are real when you have built them with the full of yourself, without performing the correct setting for any room, without calibrating toward any external requirement, without spending the afternoon convincing yourself that what you chose was fine. It was fine. It was hers. These were still the same thing. She picked up her pen. She had work to do. She did it.